Not forgetting in a minute if you want to take your seats.
It's annoying when you don't see your mouse.
Okay, cool. So next up we have Jusef, who is doing his fourth talk for us, and he's going to be talking about HTML5 games with Phaser, and just giving us a bit of an introduction to that. So thank you very much, Jusef.
Thank you. So I'm going to try something new today. I'm using slides.com, but then controlling it from my phone, so things should not go wrong. So welcome to my talk. So I'll be talking about building HTML5 games with Phaser 3. And I've called it an introduction, as I wanted to keep it really, really basic, and hopefully if people enjoy it, I'll be able to do more talks on more advanced capabilities of Phaser. For those of you who don't know me, so there we go. It already starts going wrong. Okay, there's a bit of a delay. So my name is Jusef Belkasemi, and I'm a senior full-stack engineer at a company called Infact, and I also freelance under Spectorium Limited. So I work primarily with .NET, JavaScript, dabble a little bit into Rails and Node as well every now and then. And yeah, people will probably know that my favorite JavaScript framework is still Angular. So let's talk just a little bit about HTML5 games. What are they? They've been around for quite a while. We've heard a lot of them about them, but yeah, what are HTML5 games? At its simplest, they're basically games built with standard web technologies. So essentially, games that render in the browser that you can build using HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. And they run natively in the web browser without requiring any third-party plugin. Why should we bother about building HTML5 games? Why can't we, use any other more popular engines? And well, there's a number of points. So first of all, we get a wide customer reach. As HTML5 games are basically web apps, this allows us to build games using web technologies, using the sort of web technology standards, meaning that we can reach straight away any device that runs a standards compliant browser. It's a web app. We get all the benefits that come with this. So we can host a game on a single server, which means that we can issue instant updates to our customers and sort of meet demands very fast. We can reuse our existing skills. I think this is what drew me into the world of HTML5 games. As a web developer, I could use exactly the same skills that I've been mastering for so many years to actually try and build some games. It's also a great way to learn programming. One thing that I found that over the years of building web apps, we get a little bit into the monotony of creating pages and forms and components. Building games gives you something else, that little extra bit of actually sort of learning the programming language itself. And when it comes to teaching languages, it's much more fun to build a little game and sort of see those instant results than trying to connect to databases and building sort of web forms. And finally, it's just fun. I mean, building games has probably been a dream of many of us when we first started doing work in IT. And yeah, so this can give us a possibility to go back to this fun aspect. Okay, so how do HTML5 games work? So obviously we're not going to talk about all the mechanics that go around, but just in general, so what are they? Basically, HTML5 games work by using JavaScript APIs on top of the canvas HTML5 element that allow us to basically create logic that will render pixels onto that element. In addition to that, for supporting browsers, we can take advantage of WebGL. And WebGL is basically a web graphics library that is built on top of the OpenGL standard. And it gives us another set of JavaScript APIs that allow to do much more advanced for the rendering onto the canvas element. Just to talk a little bit more about WebGL. So WebGL is what actually makes HTML5 games today even more relevant, because you can really do astonishing stuff with it. What just happened? just disconnected. Anything?
Showing yours and it's not showing on that.
Nope.
Is that working? Sorry about this. Yeah. Computers are great.
Trust technology.
Just make sure.
We've got nice fancy red ones. Better than no ones.
Okay, we're back. So sound is off.
Oh, the screen's on now.
Yeah. So sound off.
Mine isn't, but
It's not showing on yours. How's that?
don't even know how what's possible. That's what joy got to focus.
Okay, so what's going on now?
Is that broadcasting?
Yeah.
Okay. So
We're back.
now we're back.
Wait. I'm not sure what you did there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what. I didn't do anything. I wasn't touching it actually. Do you think it's because the screen turned?
Did the screen turn?
Yeah.
Go.
Use your mouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll just use this then.
If you right click on power settings, you can turn on present.
So
Right click on your power symbol.
Yeah.
Mobility symbol. And turn on Y and you got present mode. Okay. Yeah, use your mouse.
yeah. Anyway. So yeah. So apologies for that. So coming back to the to WebGL. So essentially, it's very well supported by most of the browsers these days, as you can see. And yeah, you can go to the website that shows basically all the different JavaScript APIs and how well they're supported these days. Capabilities of WebGL. So why should we be excited about it? So WebGL can perform graphics rendering tasks that are just not possible with other technologies. Or more accurately, would be much more difficult than doing it with other technologies. WebGL is very performant. It has been built for performance essentially, and as it talks, it has hardware acceleration inbuilt directly. So it basically talks to your GPU directly. WebGL application can also use mini programs known as shaders, and they allow to produce much more complex visualizations and effects. So for example, a simple shader might produce a sepia coloring, or a more complex one could produce like a water or fire effect. WebGL examples. So I thought it'll be nice to show an example of why I think WebGL is great, and there are loads of them that you can find online. One that I really liked was the site done by Google, basically where they describe how their whole cloud infrastructure works. So I've just recorded a little video just to show essentially what sort of impressive things you can actually do with WebGL graphics. So you can see it. So they basically use that website to show their entire cloud infrastructure. And you can see that the animations are quite, obviously this is the video, so the smoothness of it goes away a little bit. But yeah, in general, you can see the capabilities and how you can basically add a lot of really advanced interactive content to your website. And so you can see it kind of goes through the entire basically flow of their site. So now it's the internet as well. Fantastic. Anyway, so yeah, so that's
if you come back after this.
yeah, so that gives you basically an idea that you can do really sort of complex animations and complex sort of interactive content for your website. Okay, so let's come back to actually building HTML5 games. So let's have a look at what are the available options for developing HTML5 games. There are really two main options you can sort of use. So one, you can go native. So essentially what you can do is you can use the native Canvas and WebGL APIs and just build your games. So obviously you will need quite a lot of time for that because you will need to learn all the APIs that are behind there. You will need to implement your own sort of physics engine, and you will need to consider quite a lot of the different variations for browsers and different devices. But what you gain is that you can build a game with your own architecture in mind. You have the full freedom, and also you potentially get some sort of future-proofness because you're not going to rely on any third-party library. The second option is to use a game engine. As with any sort of development ecosystem, a number of JavaScript game engines have been developed over the years, and these engines have solved a lot of complex problems in HTML5 game development, so such as things like advanced animation, physics, or for things like handling object collisions. Most of them also provide some basic kind of ideas of a structure for your game. And especially if you're a newbie in HTML5 game development, it's a great place to start. In addition, you also, like with any sort of development ecosystem, you get the benefit of the built-in community. So you can ask questions, you can actually sort of participate in different discussions, and there is loads and loads of plugins that have been built for all these different engines that you can use straight away. There are loads and loads of JavaScript sort of game engine that are available. I've just looked at a few sort of that seem to be popular, and just decided to give you some of those examples. So one of them is Construct 2. This one is a commercial HTML5 sort of 2D based game editor. It's aimed primarily at non-developers, so it has a very sort of advanced editor with lots of drag and droppy sort of controls, and which is a great way to maybe introduce somebody who is just starting programming to actually see how a game could be built, and then they could see the code. Or yeah, if you need to build something quickly, you could use that as well. Babylon.js, this one has kept on popping up in my searches, and this is basically a full-blown sort of JavaScript framework for building 2D and 3D experiences. So they have a lot of really advanced examples of sort of games and experiences that they've built, and this includes sort of web VR and sort of web audio and all that sort of stuff. Third option is Create.js. Create.js is a suite of sort of modular tools for creating advanced animations. So if you use the whole suite, basically you'll have everything, all the components that you need to actually build HTML5 games. Again, you can go on their website and check out some examples and tutorials. Fourth option that I actually started with when I was looking at finding a tool to build HTML5 games is Pixie.js. Pixie.js is more of a sort of graphics renderer than an actual game engine, but it's so powerful and flexible that yeah, you can build games with it. And actually a number of game engines, including earlier versions of Phaser, used Pixie.js as their rendering engine internally. And finally, the option that I've chosen and when I'm talking about today is Phaser. So I'll be talking about it in more detail. There are loads more options, so you can go on this website and there's like a nice table that basically ranks them by popularity and by basically how widely they're used and adopted. So, Phaser. First of all, they have a great logo. I think that's the best that I've seen. But yeah, what is Phaser? So Phaser is an open source game development engine for building cross-platform 2D games in HTML5. It has been around for a while. So the first version was released back in 2013. And Pixie.js was the rendering engine for the first version of Phaser and for the subsequent versions up to version 2.6. The version 2 of Phaser became the Phaser Community Edition, and basically it's still an active project and still is actively maintained. But the developers behind Phaser is a company called PhotonStorm, and from reading some of their websites, I was trying to understand why Phaser 3 has come about. Basically, they were building it in parallel already for a while, and what they were trying to do is to bring all the benefits that from what they've learned into the game engine, and they also reached some limitations with using Pixie as their game engine. So they've actually developed a rendering engine specific for Phaser. So they've incorporated all the needs that they found that they couldn't get from Pixie.js. So over the years they've been working on it, and finally in February 2018 they actually released Phaser 3. So it basically was officially released. So and it was a production release basically. So why did I choose Phaser? So as you all know, us being web developers, choosing JavaScript tools has become something of a professional requirement essentially over the years. So I've devised a few sort of like choice criteria for myself when it comes to actually deciding whether I should try a tool or not. And so the criteria that I use usually is obviously first I look for fitness for purpose. So will that tool actually allow me to achieve what I want to achieve? Will it solve the actual business problem? Second, I look at technology. This is a bit of a more difficult one to look at, so I always want to make sure that I use a tool that has been architected well, that has well-structured code, that is modular, and etc. So it is quite important in my opinion. Third, I look at the human force behind the project. So who is the primary developer? How many contributors does it have? Is it active, and etc. Then I look at the community. So it's important to be able to have a large community behind the tool so that you can actually seek help and to benefit from lessons that the community already learned. An important aspect is cost. So is it open source? Is it paid? If it's paid, would it be sort of worth the price for the problem that I'm trying to solve? And last but not least, the learning curve. So as we all know, there is a high likelihood that me deciding to use this tool is going to be a mistake in a year. It would be nice to know that it's easy to learn and I could very quickly start either getting productive results or quickly understand that this is not something that I want to be using. So let's try to apply this sort of criteria to Phaser. First of all, fitness for purpose. So I was looking for a very simple 2D game engine to add some interactive content to my website. And Phaser quite well meets all these criteria. So it's a 2D game engine, as I mentioned. It has three inbuilt physics engines, so you don't need to look for other sort of third-party plugins. It has advanced sprite animations, out-of-the-box sound support, mobile browser support via a very sort of flexible scaling module, and it's performant because the way they've built it is that it automatically, by default, it will use WebGL, and it will automatically fall back to Canvas for browsers that don't support it, so you don't have to worry about that bit. Technology, so again, as I mentioned, this is a little bit hard to analyze, but initially from reading about Phaser, looking at reviews, I could see that Phaser 3 is a very modular game engine. It has a very coherent development history. You can actually go on their website and look at the authors of Phaser. They have actually been posting sort of reasonings behind certain decisions that they took when they're going to Phaser 3, and so you can actually see why Phaser 3 came about and why it's good. It's been developed with ES5 because they've started quite a while ago, but you can use TypeScript, you can use ES6, and you can, or ES5 if you want. Quite interestingly, the first version of Phaser was actually written in TypeScript, but it was so long ago and TypeScript was so bad at the time, so the guy ditched it and rewrote it all back in vanilla JavaScript. And yeah, it's it was very sort of easy to start actually, sort of using that framework. The human force. I think that that's a very strong point that Phaser has, because Phaser is developed by Photon Storm, who is a real company that actually specializes in building HTML5 games, and they use Phaser for all their projects. So essentially, to me, that shows that it's production ready, that shows that people take decisions based on not just some theoretical thoughts, but based on real world sort of problems and real world scenarios. It has over 370 contributors. I looked at sort of GitHub, there are weekly commits, and there are very, sort of, it seems to be a good issue resolution sort of time. So if you look at the amount of open issues, you can see that they're quite recent and there's a lot of issues being closed. The community, so it has over 22,000 stars, so close to 23,000 stars on GitHub. It has a very well-maintained documentation. Weekly newsletters are released if you want to sign up to those. There's a detailed, well-planned schedule actually of how they plan to deliver the functionality into Phaser 3. There's an active Slack channel, and the Stack Overflow issues seem to get responses pretty quickly. In addition to that, the developers of Phaser, they try to release like small blog posts describing certain more advanced features that you can basically consume in smaller chunks, which makes it even easier to learn. The cost, this one was an easy one. It's open source, licensed under an MIT license, so nothing for us to worry about there. And finally, the learning curve. The examples on the Phaser website are really, really good. So they go through things like just trying a very simple hello world game to actually building a more advanced game, or you can even go and look at each particular sort of component of the engine and see sort of reasonings behind it, and yeah, and why it's important essentially. It has excellent documentation, as I mentioned. So I use TypeScript with it, and the definitions are kept up to date, and they have quite sort of good explanations there as well. And then I found quite a lot of good quality third-party training courses as well, which is good. So then I thought, yeah, I'll have a look at what actually games have been built with Phaser. So I do apologize in advance if the videos are not going to load again. But basically, I've just looked at a couple of titles. So there's Mr. Driller, Incredibles 2, and Raven. So they're nothing overly exciting or complicated, but I think they show that you can build pretty cool HTML5 games, and also they'll show that the engine is actually used by reputable organizations. So first, yeah, and you can see on the Phaser's website, they post constantly new games, so they basically select the games that they find most attractive and post them there. So first up is Mr. Driller. Let's see if that one is gonna show. So basically a very simple 2D game. So you can see that it will very well display on a mobile. So you get a little bit of an explanation what you want to do. So nice little sort of animated characters. And then so the gameplay is quite simple. So you can see that you can do sort of sprite animations, and just the character will drill through trying to earn some points. Yeah. Next one up is the Incredibles 2 game. The game is not really that exciting, but I thought it was nice to see that somebody like Pixar is actually has projects built with Phaser. So it's a very simple game where you just need to collect basically cookies that fall from the sky. So again, yeah, let's hope that that's going to work. So yeah, so you use your mouse to control the character, and yeah, you can basically just do that and earn some points. So, so again, something very simple, but how much sort of joy would interactive content like that add to your website? Yeah. And finally, the third title that I've chosen is called Raven. So this one was built for the BBC, so you actually can play the game on the BBC's website. And basically, it's like a little sort of adventure game. Let's hope it loads a little bit. Shows like sort of a little bit more of the more sophisticated capabilities that you can have in the game. And yep. So essentially, you have a character that walks around, collects coins, shoots at various locks to open doors, and yeah, so you can see the shades and yeah, all the sort of more advanced capabilities basically that you can do with Phaser. And again, BBC is using Phaser in their projects, which gives a little bit of confidence to me at least when choosing that particular engine. Yeah. Okay, so now that we hopefully happy with the fact that Phaser is a potentially good candidate for building HTML5 games, let's have a look at how would you actually build a game with Phaser. First of all, we need to look at the main components of a game, and there are really sort of 7 main components that you will need to understand before starting building games with Phaser. So the components are the game, the world, the store, physics, sprite, scene, and image. So I'll just describe each one of them. So what's the game? So the game is basically the main JavaScript object that defines our game. The world, this is the area that the characters have access to in a given game. So basically the bounds of each character. The store, this is where we store the game state. So for those of you familiar with Redux, it's similar to the Redux store where you store the state for your web app. This is where you'll be storing the state for your game. The scene, this is the very important object, as basically this describes all the screens, levels, rooms, and areas of our game. Essentially, a game is a collection of scenes. The sprite, so sprite is the object that represents an image of something on the screen, and sprites are images that can be animated. Physics, so you can use one of the inbuilt 3 sort of physics engines, so they're Arcade, Ninja, and P2, and they basically allow us to use the sort of collision detections and etc. and other sort of physics aspects that are required for our game. And an image is basically a sprite just with no animation, so it's basically a simpler object that we can use to put images on the screen. So basically we can build a Hello World game in 5 simple steps. So we start by loading the Phaser library. So to do that, we can either use a CDN or download it ourselves, or if we use Webpack or any other sort of bundler, we can install it via NPM. The step 2, we need to configure the game. So the game is configured using, again, a simple JavaScript object where we define what type of the game it is. So you basically can have 3 types. You either Phaser canvas, so you're using the canvas element, either WebGL or auto. Auto means that it will use WebGL, and if it can't, it'll fall back to canvas. You define the width and the height of your the screen of your game, the physics engine, and the scene. In this instance, because it's a simple hello world, we just have 1 scene. In a complex game, you would be defining multiple scenes in here. And as you can see, the scene needs a preload and a create sort of method. So in step 3, we will preload some game assets essentially. So we do that in the preload method of the scene. So in here, we're just loading 3 images. So we're loading a background, a logo of LeedsJS, and we're loading some particles so that we can do some animation. And step 5, we need to add some game logic. And basically, in this simple hello world example, we're just gonna add the background image, add some particles, and animate them, and then we'll add the logo, scale it down, and then we'll sort of make the logo sort of bounce around the bounds of the screen. So this will, and basically, yeah, the step 5, we need to actually instantiate the game object. So essentially, the configuration that we've done before, plus the preload and the create method, and we just create a new phaser game object with that. So this simple few steps will result in something in this. So essentially, we have a bouncing LeedsJS logo with some particles sort of flying out of it. Yeah. So, where to go next from here? Essentially, what I would recommend to everyone is to get a good tutorial. A good starting point would be the Phaser's website. So they have loads and loads of tutorials on there, loads of examples. So you can look at you can maybe even start with the problem that you have in hand and see if they already have some examples of that particular animation that you want, or that particular sort of game type, whether it's a sort of like a 3D game, or you know, a top sort of facing game, and etc. And yeah, it's a great place to start. The other resource that I found really useful to me is a company called Zenva. They've built a learning platform called Zenva Academy, and they have really sort of in-depth courses on how to build HTML5 games with Phaser. So I'm going myself through a course on building roleplay games in Phaser, and the guy really goes through all the different steps, and you know, how you structure your code, you know, how you can build reusable components, and etc., etc. So I think if you're serious about it, it's a great. The courses are paid, but I think the price is reasonable for what you actually get out of it. And finally, try a template project. So you have already available template projects like the Phaser 3 with ES6 and Webpack. So essentially it's a Git repo that you clone and off you go. Everything is there. So you just hit an npm run dev and it's all works. And I personally like TypeScript. So I use the Phaser 3 plus TypeScript and Webpack template project. So again, once I share the slides, all of those are hyperlinked, so you can actually see those yourself. Yeah, and finally, just go build some games. So it's an exciting field to try out. There's loads of possibilities, loads of coupling things you can do. So hopefully you will do that. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much, Jusef. I will just plug this, and don't forget to take your